where we start always is we're beginning to define more the macro-logistic processes, I call it. And we've learned now that we've been in many countries in the world, we've learned the process. And I think one of these days we hope to publish our second book that talks more about the standard process of doing a macro-logistics assessment, if I can call it that. And we standard, and I'll give you examples right now. We always ask the question about the demand side fundamentals for a country's logistics landscape, and then the supply side fundamentals. How is the supply? And for logistics strategy that you have on a business level, on a macro logistics level, we always ask these three questions. What are the policies that can change things? What is the infrastructure that can change things? And what is the spatial strategies that can change things? These things we talk about to calculate the lowest cost of ownership, which all of you know by now is what logistics do. It calculates the lowest cost of ownership, but in this case, the lowest cost of ownership for an economy. And I'll come back to that principle as well. I have to give some credit to the World Bank. That's one of our, probably about 60 or 70% of our overseas projects, not in South Africa, but overseas projects. The World Bank is a sponsor. And it became interesting to work with the World Bank because they always ask this type of questions. I'm going to concentrate now on the questions that I asked about Mongolia. They do for every country where they try to make a difference. And one of the World Bank's biggest focuses in life is not to make money, but is to raise poverty, to make living better for all people in the world. In this case, they always publish a thing called an infrasub. And from that, various loan agreements follow, depending on what is required to do. And in case infrasub is an infrastructure assessment, in this one they ask those questions. What is these energy, transport, and digital infrastructure that's needed to specifically support growth? How can it be financed and funded? And then what policy, institutional, and regulatory reforms are required to do it? And you'll see there's a nice correlation between these questions that the World Bank would ask and then what we would do. And what I also want to say is we're experiencing a massive growth in macro logistics. It's a global growth, and we are very proud of it, and we're very glad about it. Article was published this week by Ruth Banyamong, some of you met him, and David Grant. These two people I know very well, where they're beginning to talk about the total cost of ownership of economies. They quote some of our work quite extensively, and we're very proud of this. And we're very happy that it's finally happening, and we think it's now sort of on the map. I'm often asked about the research process, and I know there's some students that's phoned in here as well, or that's listening in. We basically always, more or less always, know what we do. We use the grounded theory approach. The grounded theory approach in this case, and I'll show you examples now, say there's a problem. We gather as much information that we can about the problem. From that we create models and solutions. And then we correlate those models and solutions with what's happening in real life. Eventually out of that we develop a theory, and the theory we get published in academic journals, etc., etc. Examples here, we've started doing this for South Africa. And always there's some sort of a problem or a trigger. For South Africa, it's long transport distances. It's the fact that most of our production factors is far away from the sea. The fact that we have infrastructure that should be used like the railway that's failing us. We understand that, and we actually then our modeling was focused on that, and we provided some solutions. We're doing a model for Sub-Saharan Africa, the 17 countries in Sub-Saharan Africa. Yeah, we're talking about the same things as South Africa, except that also the road infrastructure is sometimes challenged, and border crossings is a problem. Border crossings causes an economic theory, causes a thing that we call price dispersion. For logistics, it means delays at borders, and we are doing our 4th honors assignment this year about border delays and the effect of that on the logistics cost of a nation, which we are also quite happy about. We've done a model for the Western Cape. The interesting problem with the Western Cape is the province in South Africa with the biggest trade problem. And now I'm talking about the trade between provinces. We are the largest and furthest away from any other province on general and an average that we trade with from the Western Cape. So the 10 kilometers in relationship to GDP is the highest. We are quite extensively busy in India for the last 5 years. Also an interesting place. India's problem is that they've got a massive social mobility experiment going. Give you an idea, a train ticket between Delhi and Kolkata, the biggest corridor over here, one of the most dense corridors in the world, 1,700 kilometers will cost you 50 Rand. The Delhi subway is a beautiful subway. It's easy to use. It costs 2 Rand a ticket. What they do is they subsidize their passenger freight out of their freight, railway freight. So that's one of the biggest problems, and that's one of that we want to solve there. The city of Kolkata, we also have a model for that, which we are extensively using. A city that's one of the most congested places in the world. The truck's not allowed to enter the city between 8 o'clock in the morning and midnight. About 25,000 trucks arrive in the city every day. So we're trying through our modeling to solve that problem. There's Mongolia, I'll come back to that. There's Uzbekistan, country in Middle Asia. It's at the crossroads of the Belt and Road project. And it also has a lot of issues because of the fact it's there. And as Mongolia, Uzbekistan is dependent on all the freight outside of its borders, more than inside its borders. And because it's one of the only two double landlocked countries in the world, the other one is Liechtenstein, which means that every one of the neighbors of Uzbekistan is also landlocked. It's got a lot of problems because of that. And then we have, in the last 4 weeks, we started doing a model for South Sudan. And those of you that know the logistics theory that we always spoke about in class was for the students, you know that logistics is the result of specialization. Because we specialize, we have logistics. South Sudan, we're looking at for the first time, is the most interesting place I've ever been to. They've got institutionalized subsistence farming. There's about 12 provinces, and I think the 12 provinces go to about 30 or so sub-regions of the country. They all hate each other. They're in constant war, and they don't like to exchange between themselves. So this is going to be an interesting journey. So out of all of this, for each of these countries, we want to determine logistics flows, as you see on the map, the cost involved in that flow, the other logistics costs that you know about, cash-to-cash cycle, or in theory, we call it the opportunity cost of holding inventory, warehousing, admin. We also try to add externalities. We've spoken about that. And out of all of that, we want to this large array of intelligence volumes and forecasts that we put together from which we want to calculate the lowest cost of ownership. Now, Mongolia, very, very interesting place. It's the size of Europe. So simple to say it. So Mongolia is as big as Europe. It's got 3 million people, of which 1.5 million people live in the capital, Ulaanbaatar. And the other 1.5 million people is dispersed through the country. Mostly herders. There's 400,000 herder households in Mongolia. You don't have a farm, you just have cattle and sheep and camels and horses, and you just trek around with those things. Now, if you think about it, if Mongolia is the size of Europe, or 1.5 times the size of South Africa, it's got 0.05% of Europe's GDP. Europe's GDP is 20 trillion, Mongolia is about 10 billion. So it makes it one of the most spatially challenged countries in the world. It's landlocked, which is a problem, and everything has to move vast distances. The average transport distance of 602 kilometers is very, very long. It's got logistics performance that's quite bad, 130 out of 160 countries, out of the World Bank's index that you know, and its logistics cost as a percentage of GDP about 26%. It's 13% for South Africa. And the worst, Uzbekistan that we spoke about 17%, and China 14%. So it's got huge logistics challenges. A lot of investment that's required in roads, things like that, and they don't have the money to do it with. Another way of looking at the demand side, which is what I'm looking at now, is looking at the GDP per ton kilometer for every country in the world. They try to measure it. South Africa's is quite low. It's in the region of about 70 cents or so. The global average is 230. We've spoken about that in class as well for the students. The global GDP is about $80 trillion. The global surface ton kilometer is about 32 trillion. You get about $2.30 for every ton kilometer input into your economy. Mongolia gets 30 cents, which is dismal. It means that you need a lot of ton kilometers to keep the economy going. That's what it says. And you have to deliver those ton kilometers over a country with poor roads, with only one railway that sort of runs through the heart of the country in the middle on the east side. And you need a lot of investments to fix that, but you still have a lot of demand to actually do it, if you think about that. And this is what we try to do. We want to say logistics cost as percentage of GDP needs to be the lowest as possible. What do? You have two levers that you throw. The one is you make the logistics cost lower, usually by delivering or by reducing bottlenecks, which you can do through infrastructure delivery. You can do it through policy. There's certain things that you can do on the policy side. You can do spatial reorganization, do things like that. That will deliver or give you a lower logistics cost. Or alternatively, you can industrialize more to push up your GDP. This is a basic approach to lowering the total cost of ownership. If you think about it, it's the same as with a business, and this is what we try to do. So you solve it by either increasing the GDP or lowering logistics costs. And each of their strategies got those requirements, as I say. This, by the way, is a statue of Genghis Khan. Put it here for a reason. Genghis Khan was the leader of the second biggest empire that ever existed in the world. The biggest one was the British Empire. The Mongol Empire in its time was the biggest for today, up to today, the biggest contiguous empire in the world. In that sense, bigger than the British Empire, and absolutely concentrated on trade. They built the empire. People think it's war, but it was war first and trade after that. So based on trade, they started the principle of paper money. They loved traders. They said that you could walk from the East Europe to Ulaanbaatar or to Mongolia with a gold bowl on your head if you're a trader, and you'll be safe. By the way, if you go and visit this statue, it's the biggest cavalry statue in the world. It's 40 meters high, and you take a lift up here and you go and stand there, top of the head. Very, very interesting to see. So our first thing that we do is we develop a freight flow model. Now for Mongolia, we used 84 commodities. Now, I'm not going to go through them at all. I'll show you 2 or 3 that we need to talk about, but they work on the same principle. You have a supply side and a demand side. A lot of agriculture in the north of Mongolia. This is close to Siberia. There's a lot of water and stuff here. This is the desert, the Gobi Desert. And this is the demand side. You will see that is the capital, Ulaanbaatar, where 1.5 of the 3 million live in the middle of Mongolia. This is the Chinese border and the Russian border. That would be exports of agricultural stuff that you see there through the border. Agriculture here. This is agriculture. This is the mining side. You see various mines in Mongolia. They basically have copper, coal, and iron ore. A lot of beautiful coal. They've got the coking coal, which is high-value coal. And you see they don't use it themselves. There's no industrialization in Mongolia. All of this stuff gets exported through the borders. And then there's very little manufacturing, a little bit over here. And then obviously the consumption of manufacturing in the capital, Ulaanbaatar. All of these things that you see over here, it's because they make things for themselves. It's basically why there's a little bit of blue going through the whole thing. That gives you flows. That's the flow of agriculture, basically helping themselves. Subsistence farming, some stuff going to Ulaanbaatar. This is mining, pushing it all of it out of the country, and a little bit of manufacturing, mostly imports that you see over there. So what you see here is, as I say, vast transport distances. Things has to go far. Tons of 67 million, 41 billion ton kilometers, basically imports and exports with a vein of agriculture that goes into the middle of the country. But this is the problem. This is the same as Uzbekistan. And that is, they are dependent on trade outside of their borders. So they are actually, when they look at logistics, they have to say, what does my neighbor's logistics look like? If you think about it over here, 46 million or 18 billion ton kilometers of what's required to keep the economy of Mongolia going is actually outside of Mongolia. And that is another problem that we had to look at. So we started to look at value chains. One of the value chains we looked at was quite obvious. They've got coal, they've got iron ore. We said, okay, why don't you put the DRI plant up? Which is, DRI is direct reduced iron. And direct reduced iron, you put together, if you flow coal, you flow iron ore, you put a plant somewhere. And we said, okay, let's do a sum. We put a plant here at Darkan. Darkan is a little town, looks like this. Towards the north of Mongolia, not too far away from the Russian border, and a lot of iron ore coal in the vicinity, and the other one is a plant closer to the Chinese border because there's coal and iron ore here as well. We followed this, we made some calculations, And then we also looked at agricultural commodities, milk, processed foods, animals, and meat. And we realized there is a lot of animals in Mongolia. We'll come back to that. Very, very interesting. I read today that South Sudan is very proud of themselves because they've got 3 animals per person in South Sudan. Mongolia has got 70 million animals in their national herd, which means more than 20 animals per person in Mongolia. So we concentrated on meat. Eventually, we asked ourselves this total cost of ownership question. For each one of these 6, 7 opportunities that we've identified, where will you reduce the national logistics cost as GDP, change it the most from the current 25%? What is the lowest possibility that you can get? And that was meat. So that would work out for us. And the other one we asked, to what extent can you increase GDP? And the highest there was meat, and it was DRI. So we had the choice to make of going further in terms of value chains of either meat or DRI. So that was the 2 options we had to make. We had a long discussion about this. We analyzed it. And DRI will not have a huge effect on what the World Bank wants to do, which is to reduce poverty. It is basically mines. They will build the infrastructure that is required to push the commodities towards the plants. It'll push the DRI out of the country. It will make certain people rich, but not everybody. Meat will have a direct effect on the life of 400,000 herder households. So we thought, let's go to meat and we see what we can do. Now, this was one of the most interesting things that we found. This is the national herd of Mongolia. So if you go back 10 years, the national herd of Mongolia had 33 million animals. Today they've got 70 million animals. That sounds fantastic. This is wonderful. What is not so wonderful is there's not much more people in Mongolia than 10 years ago. You can do the calculation yourself. And there's no exports of meat. Not very little, not a lot. That sounds impossible. It is impossible. The reason is they've got massive losses. They waste the meat. And as they've been wasting it, they've been growing their herds in order to make up for this waste. And especially over the last decade. And basically these herder households have a really, really rough time. It's not working for them. And there's lots of reasons why it happens. The reasons, it's about animal health, it's about how they breed, it's how they manage their pasture land because they're becoming overgrazed at some places. You cannot believe it, a country 1.5 times the size of South Africa. So they try to fix that. We concentrated on the logistics aspects, which is the poor connectivity, the logistics systems that's missing, trading and marketing platform, and how to get other people involved. Our calculation said, we can fix all of this. We can get 250,000 tons of meat to export, which is nearly $1 billion. Now think about it. Mongolia's GDP is $10 billion. And we can do that through these 5 things. Animal health, better facilities, lower wastage, increased value added, and access to platform market. So what will it do? The current flow of meat looks like this, basically. So everybody eats their own meat, and then they take it to Ulaanbaatar. Now, I have 2 pictures like this. This is not a tongue-in-the-cheek type of thing. This is just real. I couldn't find my own, so I went and looked for another picture. This is real. They just don't have any systems. So every farmer will put his camels or horses or cows or whatever, they'll slaughter them, they'll take them to a friend in Ulaanbaatar, 1.5 million people, no real butcheries, and you will throw the carcass on your veranda during the winter. I was there both in the summer and the winter. In the winter, temperature drops to minus 35 degrees Celsius, so you don't need any facilities. In the summer, everything just basically rots. Very, very inefficient as well. You can imagine what I'm talking about, and this is how it works. So what happens? If you take the value of an animal through the value chain, from live to slaughtered to quartered to processed meat, and that's the value, what do they lose? They lose a massive amount while the animal is still alive because it dies of disease. And then the Chinese comes over the border with little buckies, and they take this meat or this live animals from the farmers for more or less nothing, from the herders. The herder is basically a subsistence farmer. It doesn't matter if he gets a little bit of money. Then after it's slaughtered, they perish poor abattoir practices. I've seen this with my own eyes. You cannot believe it. You cannot believe how they treat meat, like badly. And then because of this, there's no trading platform for Mongolian beef, like you get for Australian beef, like you get for Namibian beef these days. You just don't have it. Now, how do you fix that? You fix that with animal health process, for unbroken cold chain. Very interesting, the certification process and the robust planning platform. So we said, what if we consolidate this? So we want to put up 8 hubs. This is, by the way, really going to happen. We want to put up, it's actually 7 hubs in the central freight village. That hub will collect the meat and put it together, and I'll show you a little bit more now about what this hub is going to do. We'll collect the meat. Then we'll have the roads. We focus on those roads to first fix those roads in Mongolia, specifically those. So when the roads ministry came to us and said they want roads for year and year and year, we said, if you don't want roads for this, then we're not going to finance it. This is the roads we will finance. This is the hubs that we will finance. And this is the way which we can fix it. And over these roads, you can have very, very nice, fantastic reefer container traffic or a reefer truck traffic. It will be much cheaper than we have now. We've done all the calculations, much better way of doing it. And that was the plan that we have. So we have the potential meat supply. We identify these hubs based on where the animals are. So you will see whenever you have a little bit of an extension over here, it becomes darker. That's where we put the hubs with a central freight village over here, which is Tuf, around Ulaanbaatar. And that will give us this flows of the 250,000 that we want to push out of there. There's a railway line here. Over here, we put up an intermodal facility around the freight village and we push it out of the country. So we had broke this thing up in 3 regions. There we identified the roads. We said, wait a minute, there's already reasonably good roads over here. Here's the roads, and those are the roads that we will invest in, and we will invest in this hubs and in this freight village over here. And this is basically the idea of what one of those hubs would look like. A meat processing facility, some dairy processing, because that's obviously administrative services, logistics services. There will be a feedlot, cold storage, you will have good abattoir practices. And then we have another idea, which we're also going to do. And that we said, why don't we get mobile abattoirs like this? We give a license to one of the people that's now hasn't got a job around there. There's lots of them. Give him a license, give him a truck, give him a mobile abattoir, and he drives around, and he or she collects the meat. It gets slaughtered right there in the veld. Immediately goes into the cold chain. It stays in the cold chain towards the cold storage, towards the processing abattoir. It stays in the cold chain on that big reefer truck all the way to the central freight village, and it stays in the cold chain all the way. So we pick up the cold chain much earlier. And this worked out fantastically for us. This is our final design of our hub. I'm not going to go into it. But you'll see mobile abattoirs, the slaughterhouse over here, the feedlot, and the whole size of how it's going to work. From that, we developed an investment structure of how it's going to work in terms of the World Bank and the government and ministry, all of these people involved in this, loans, etc. And then we start putting together a macro logistics performance measures, as we call them. It needs to look at connectivity. It needs to look at logistics systems and platform and the institutional capacity. So what we do is we're advising the government. We show them how to do it. We share survey results with them. And that triggered a loan of $150 million. Very small if I compare it to anything that we do anywhere else in the world, but an extremely satisfying project if you think about it. From there. This is the macro logistics components of our project. Number 1 is obviously the infrastructure investments. That's the 2,300 kilometers of strategic roads that's involved in this. There's about 500 kilometers in poor condition that needs priority intervention out of this $150 million, and a road asset management framework. There's transport service and logistics hubs. So we'll put together logistics hubs right through the country, and at TUF we will have a consolidation point. And also create a logistics supply chain platform. This is a line of sight platform that looks back in the value chain, looks forward in the value chain, and creates a platform where you can certify the meat. And anywhere in the world you can buy Mongolian certified meat. It destroys price dispersion, and it makes it possible all the way from the herder down to when you deliver the meat in China. to have visibility of the meat, where it comes from, what it does, etc. And then technical assistance and capacity building, which is part of this. Out of this, interestingly, already we had 2 other projects. If I think about India, we had about 20 different projects in India, of which only about 3 or 4 has been published. I wish there were more of us and we could publish more. That would have been interesting. This too has already been done. We said, well, if you have meat flows, you're also going to have leather flows, and a project to position the central hub. And I'm not going to go into detail there, just show 1 or 2 small things about it. We developed criteria of what the central hub should look like. Land size, what will it cost to get it, does it have access to road and rail, is there people there to actually do the work, etc., etc. From that, this is Stefan's work. I specifically mentioned Stefan. Stefan is a fantastic member of our team. He put together a objective function to determine this. His GIS work and objective function work. He's done wonderful work in India for this, which we are also very proud. In Kolkata and in India and on the corridor, and now in Mongolia. He owns this. He's very well known with the World Bank by now, how he does this in developing nations. So he put this together. He looked at the major road and rail. This is Ulaanbaatar. This is the province of the IMAC, as they call it, the IMAC of Tuf, around Ulaanbaatar. He then said he looked at buildings and land use and nature reserves. Nature reserves is quite important. I'll come back to that. You want to be as far away from a nature reserve. You want to be close to buildings. You want to be at a place where the land use is suitable. And you want to be close to stations and bus stops so that you have people, you can move people easily to your location that you choose on. You then have a weighted proximity to this criteria, where this is most attractive and this is least attractive. And you then identified 5 sites. I put this here as tongue in the cheek. This is equal to the boot of Genghis Khan on that statue. This is actually in the foyer of that building in which the statue is. So if you come here, you see this boot is made from 225 hides of animals. And it talks about this statue and everything is over here. This is one of the things that we need to consider. You don't want to be close to this place. So in the end, if we really, really want to go in a sustainable fashion, we actually maybe, because of other considerations, other economic considerations, go for Baragangai, which is over here. We'll still get to that. There's a nature reserve here. It's a wonderful place to visit. And you don't want to destroy that for what you do. Then at cattle height, most of the cattle is at Baragangai over here for sheep and for cattle. And we worked out the flows from that to 2 different locations. So we had a different plan here. We said we can go to Baragangai, and when you use the same route and systems that we currently have, or we can put this up at Darkan, which is more of an industrial place. Why? Because tanneries are not nice places. You don't want them close to important things that could be hurt by them. So we thought we could still flow it, use our system that we already have. We want to piggyback on it, but then just rail it, and it's not too expensive from Baragangai to Darkan, and actually do the tannery over there. We worked out, I'm not going to go into the detail, but this was another interesting game to play, to work out the logistics of this and how to do the logistics and what the cost involved would be. So where does it all take us? I've shown you this before, and I'm going to end with this. Why do I want to do this? All of this work that we've done, we've published, and I'll come back to this. We've published all of it, a little bit of it, but what I mean with all of it, I mean a little bit for each country. But what does it mean for the academic process? I've shown this before, and I'm going to show it again. You have society, and I put society always up. I always put society up because we were challenged by a previous president, Thabo Mbeki. He said to academics, you must do work that can change society. Society is important. How do we do that? We start with foundational theory. We package that into teaching modules, and then we deliver capable students to society. That is our primary job. We understand that, and this is what we want to do. But universities want us to do research. Why do we do research? We do research because it contributes to the theory. So I want to say, if you're a lecturer, I'm going to say it now, I'm going to say it straight, like Johan always say. I'm going to say it without fear or favor. Your first job as a lecturer is to get a PhD. Reason? because you need to contribute to the theory. It's a proof that you can contribute to the theory. From there, your research can enhance your teaching module, and your teaching module can also ask you questions about research opportunities all the time. And finally, what you want is discoveries. In our case, we believe we discovered macrologistics as something important that society needs to do. And from that, you create centers of excellence. Now, for us, in macrologistics, when we did this research, we started by doing it in a grounded theory fashion. And it showed us that if we look at the macrologistics environment of each country, we can actually come up with solutions that are very much the same. Standard theory, which we pushed back into the theory of macrologistics, and out of that created what we call centers of excellence. And we have people from the teaching community now, which is sometimes ourselves. We have researchers from outside of our group that now continuously are part of our team. Practitioners that came out of the student body, is one or two of them already. The entrepreneurs that we work with at the World Bank and quite a few other places to create what we now believe is a center of excellence. This is outcomes for academia, the research. This is outcome for society. Capable students and discoveries that can change society as such. Just out of interest sake, with our work in Mongolia and macrologistics in general, we've now written the first book on the topic. We've published or submitted articles on each one of those 9 regions that I showed you before. In each one of them, we've been an invited speaker at one of the conferences over there. We've delivered 3 PhDs. Many of you know Zane by now. Zane's defense is on Thursday. I'm very proud of that because Mongolia formed a part of what Zane's work was all about. And any international transport forum started involving us. At the moment, we're part of roundtables in Mexico and Argentina. And we work with them on the future of rail publication and the Transport Outlook publication that was launched a few days ago. Every year, we did the peer review of that publication, and we were also discussant at the launch. For Mongolia, we've already submitted 2 articles. There's 2 that's on its way, and it also contributed for us towards the standardization of the theory.